The rain had come down for 3 days without pause, and by the third afternoon, the water in the scullery had risen high enough to soak the hem of Honora's gray wool where she knelt beside the copper. She did not stop scrubbing. She'd learned at some point between her 22nd birthday and this her 29th that stopping only meant the cold caught up with you sooner. The kitchen at Wycliffe Hall did not tolerate stopping. Mrs. Barton, the housekeeper, moved through it like weather, and weather at Wycliffe was chiefly unforgiving. "Miss Fairborn," came the voice above her now, not unkind, but not kind either. "The linen presses in the south wing. Before the hour, if you please. Her ladyship's sister comes to dinner, and the sheets in the blue room smell of the damp." "Yes, Mrs. Barton." "And your face is smudged." Honora reached up and touched her cheek with the back of her wrist, and felt the soap there and made no comment. She had a face people remarked upon, though never in the ways that mattered. Lovely face, they said, in the tone one used to describe a portrait hung above a mantel one did not particularly care for. Lovely face on such a large woman. Lovely face, dull as a ladle. She had heard that last one at 14 from her cousin Prudence, and had never quite lost the shape of it in her chest. Lovely face, dull as a ladle. She rose from the copper. She was a big woman, tall and broad, heavy through the shoulders and heavier still through the hips, and rising from a kneel in wet wool was the work of a full breath. She did it without flinching. She had been rising from such positions for 7 years, ever since her father's debts had eaten the last of the Fairborn plate, and she had been sent to Wycliffe as a poor relation, which is to say as a body that could be put to use in exchange for a bed, and 3 meals, and the occasional gown someone else no longer wore. She was, by strict blood, a cousin to the family. She was, by daily practice, something less than that and something more than a maid. She kept the still room. She counted the linens. She wrote out menus in a hand her aunt praised in company and dismissed in private. She sat in the corner of the drawing room when guests came, and she was never introduced. She had learned to make herself, in her aunt's phrase, useful without being observed. The linen smelled of damp, because the roof over the blue room dormer had gone soft at the join. Honora had reported this in April. She had reported it again in June. It was now October, and the rain had come, and the linen smelled of damp, and she carried the fresh sheets up 2 flights of the servants' stair, because the front stair was for the family and their guests. But you must understand, before we go further, that a house that does not see a woman is a house that is preparing, without knowing it, to lose her. And when a house begins to lose such a woman, it is astonishing how quickly the roof leaks, and how loudly. She was folding the last corner of the counterpane when she heard the carriage. It was not her aunt's sister. Her aunt's sister traveled in a plain, black chaise with a squeaking axle. This carriage had 2 grays, matched, and a coat of arms upon the door that even from the dormer window Honora recognized. She had seen it once at a distance, at the county assembly 2 Christmases past, when she had been permitted to attend as her aunt's companion, and had spent the evening holding shawls. The Duke of Harrowmere. She stood at the dormer with the counterpane still half in her hands, and watched him hand his hat to the groom, and walk toward the door of Wycliffe Hall, as though the rain were an inconvenience he had already dismissed. She did not know then, and would not know for some hours yet, that he had come on a matter concerning her. Downstairs a bell was already ringing. Bell was. Mrs. Barton's voice climbed the servant's stair like smoke. Honora finished the counterpane. She smoothed it with her palm. She had been raised to finish what was in her hand before she answered a bell, and she had never seen a reason to unlearn it. Then she went down. Her aunt met her at the foot of the stair with a face like scraped ice. "Change your apron. Wash your hands. Do it quickly. The Duke of Harrowmere is in the yellow parlor, and he has asked to see you." "Me." "He has asked to see the eldest unmarried Fairborn woman in this house. That is you, unfortunately. Change your apron. And Honora." "Yes, Aunt." Do not speak unless you are spoken to. Do not sit unless he sits. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to be witty. Honora considered several answers to this and used none of them. She washed her hands. She put on her better gray, the one without the mend at the elbow, and she went to the yellow parlor and stood inside the door because no one had told her she might sit. The Duke of Harrowmere was standing at the window with his back to the room. He was tall. He was very still. When he turned, the light caught his face, and she saw at once that he was not a man who smiled at strangers, and possibly not at anyone. She was, by then, thoroughly composed. She had learned composure the way other women learned French. "Miss Fairborn," he said. His voice was low. It did not carry an ounce of warmth, but neither did it carry contempt, which put him already ahead of most men who had said her name that year. "Thank you for coming down." "Your Grace." He looked at her. He looked at her longer than was polite by the standards of drawing rooms, and less long than her aunt had done every day of the past 7 years by the standards of household inspections. Then he said, "May I speak with you alone?" Her aunt made a sound like a kettle being taken off the flame. "Your Grace, I would think that hardly proper. The door may remain open. The housekeeper may stand in the corridor. I require 10 minutes with your niece, and I do not intend to trouble the household for longer than that." He had not raised his voice. He had, in fact, lowered it. And still her aunt closed her mouth and left the room, and Mrs. Barton was heard to take up a position outside the door with the deliberate rattle of keys of a woman who was going to hear every syllable spoken within. The Duke gestured to a chair. Honora sat because she had been told she might. He remained standing, then evidently thought better of it, and sat also on the edge of the chair opposite, as though he were not certain of his welcome and did not intend to overstay it. "Miss Fairborn," he said, and stopped. He was, she realized with quiet astonishment, uncertain how to begin. A duke who did not know how to begin. This was novel. "You have come," she said gently, "for a reason. It will be easier for both of us if you say it." His mouth moved, not a smile, something adjacent to a smile that had not been permitted to arrive. "Very well. Miss Fairborn, 6 days ago, my valet, in a moment of extraordinary indiscretion, for which he has since been reprimanded and forgiven, repeated to me a remark I had made in his hearing 3 years ago at a shooting party at this house. The remark concerned you. I did not know at the time that it had been overheard by anyone but him. I have since learned that it was overheard by a maid, who repeated it to your aunt's lady's maid, who repeated it to your aunt, who I now suspect has repeated it to you." She sat very still. "I have not heard the remark from my aunt," she said, which was true, and which was also, she realized as she said it, entirely beside the point, because she knew what he was going to say next. She had known from the first syllable. The remark was, "Lovely face, dull as a ladle." Lovely face, dull as a ladle. There it was, in the yellow parlor, in the rain, spoken by the man who had said it. Her aunt had never used those exact words. Prudence had, at 14, but Prudence had got them from somewhere, and now Honora knew where. She looked at her hands in her lap. They were red at the knuckles from the copper. She thought, absurdly, that they were also honest hands, and she was not going to hide them. "I remember the shooting party," she said. "I served the punch. You did not speak to me." "No." "You spoke of me." "Yes." "To your valet." "Yes." "That is a great many words about a woman you had determined was not worth 2. He absorbed that without flinching. He did not defend himself. He did not soften it. He said, "I have come to apologize." "Have you?" "I have come to apologize, and I have come because in the 3 years since I made that remark, I have had cause to reconsider it, and in the 3 weeks since my valet repeated it to me, I have been unable to think of anything else. I do not intend to leave this house today without saying to you what I ought to have said then, which is that I was wrong. I did not know you. I looked at you across a crowded room, and I made a judgment that was unworthy of me, and I said it aloud to a man who had no business hearing it, and it has traveled, as such things do. I owe you the apology. I would like to offer it before I say anything else." She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Your Grace, you have not yet finished." He looked at her. "You said before you say anything else, which suggests there is something else. Please say it. I have linens to finish, and my aunt will not thank me for a long absence." His jaw moved. She saw it move. And here is where the story turns, though neither of them knew it in that room, because Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Harrowmere, had walked into Wycliffe Hall expecting to deliver an apology and depart, and had discovered instead a woman who took his apology with one hand and asked, with the other, what he intended to do about it. "I have a daughter," he said. "I had heard. She is 7. Her mother has been dead these 4 years. I had heard that also. She has not spoken since the funeral." Honora's hands went very still in her lap. Her face did not change. Her hands did. Not a word? Not a word to me. Not a word to her nurse. Not a word to the 3 governesses I have engaged in succession, each of whom departed within the quarter, one of them in tears. She writes. She writes a great deal. She reads. She sits at the pianoforte and plays it well. She will not speak, and I have been told by a physician in London and by a physician in Edinburgh that there is nothing wrong with her voice, and I have been told by a clergyman that I must pray, and I have been told by my late wife's sister that I ought to send the child to her, and I have said no to that last thing so often, and with such heat, that my sister-in-law has begun proceedings to remove the child from my custody on the grounds that a widowed father with no proper female influence in the house is not a fit guardian for a girl of 7 years. He said all of this in the same low voice, without inflection, as though it were a report from a steward. Honora said, "When are the proceedings heard?" "In 6 weeks, in the Court of Chancery." "And what has this to do with me, Your Grace?" He looked at her. My valet, when he repeated the remark, added something. He said, and I quote him because I have not been able to stop quoting him to myself. He said, "Your Grace, the woman you call dull as a ladle spent an hour last night in the corridor at Wycliffe with a footman's boy who had cut his hand on a broken decanter, and she bandaged it, and she sang to him, because he was frightened, until he stopped crying, and I have never in my life seen a stranger do so patient a thing." I asked him how he knew this. He said the footman was his cousin. I have been thinking about it for 3 weeks, Miss Fairborn. I have a daughter who will not speak, and a court that will take her from me if I cannot show that this house is not a house that swallows children whole, and I have thought a great deal about what kind of woman I need to place in her life, and I have concluded that I do not need a lady of rank. I need a woman who will sit in a corridor for an hour with a frightened child and sing to it. I have come to ask if you would consent to marry me, by the end of this month, before the hearing, as my wife-in-law and in name, and as a mother to my daughter, and as the mistress of my house." He stopped. Mrs. Barton, outside the door, dropped her keys. Honora heard them fall. She did not turn her head. She looked at the Duke of Harrowmere across 4 feet of Turkey carpet, and she said, in the voice she had trained for 7 years to feel nothing visibly, "You are asking me to marry you because I sang to a crying boy." "I am asking you to marry me because you sang to a crying boy when no one was watching. You said I was dull as a ladle. I did. I was wrong. I have said so. I will say so as many times as you require me to say it. I would like, if you will permit it, to say it to you every day until you are tired of hearing it, but I do not expect you to marry me on the strength of the apology. I expect you to marry me, if you marry me at all, because I have a daughter, and you have hands that know what to do with a frightened child, and because I have need of you, Miss Fairborn, and I have not had the need of anyone in a great many years, and I am not accustomed to it, and I am not saying it well," she said. "You are saying it better than you think." He blinked. She stood. He stood also at once, which she noted. "Your Grace, before I give you any answer, I will require 3 things of you. If you cannot give me these 3 things, I will decline, and we will part on good terms, and you may find another woman by the end of the month, of whom I am certain there are many." "Name them." "First, you will tell me every particular of the case against your custody, not the softened version, all of it. What your sister-in-law has said of you, of your late wife, of your house. I do not go into a battle blind, and I do not marry a stranger blind. I will have the truth entire." "Agreed." "Second, your daughter has not spoken in 4 years. I will not enter her life pretending to be her mother. Her mother was, I take it, loved." "She was." "Then her mother will not be erased from this house because I have entered it. Her portrait, her rooms, her habits, whatever of her the child holds to, will be kept. I do not replace. I stand beside." He was quiet a long moment. "Agreed, and thank you." "Third, if I do this, I do it as your wife, not as a hired governess in a duchess's ring. You will not introduce me to your household or to your county as a solution or as a mother for the child. You will introduce me as your wife, plainly, without apology, and if any person under your roof or at your table treats me otherwise, you will correct them, publicly, and at once. I have been useful in a house for 7 years, Your Grace. I will not be useful in another one. I will be married, or I will not come." He looked at her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of unexpected weather that has surprised him with its force. Then he inclined his head. "Agreed, Miss Fairborn, on all 3 counts, and I will add a 4th, which is mine to give. If at any time within the 1st year you find that you cannot bear this arrangement, you will have my word, before witnesses if you require them, that you may remove to any house I own, with an income for life, and I will not seek to prevent it, and I will not shame you in the doing. I do not intend to trap you. I intend to marry you. Those are not the same thing." The rain was very loud on the parlor window. Honora said, "I will give you my answer by tomorrow at noon." He bowed. He did not smile, but something at the corner of his mouth had moved, and she saw it move, and she knew, even before she had walked back up the servant's stair with her hand trailing the wall for balance, that she was going to say yes, and that she was terrified, and that she was, for the first time since her father's ruin, not entirely alone. That night she did not sleep. Her aunt did not send for her, which was a mercy. Her aunt had shut herself in the drawing-room with a decanter and a great deal of injured astonishment, and Mrs. Barton, moving through the house with the settled purpose of a woman who intended to be on the winning side of whatever came next, brought Honora a bowl of soup at 10 o'clock and did not say a word about the Duke, which was the greatest kindness she had ever shown her. At noon the next day, Honora sent her answer down in a folded note carried by the boot boy, because she did not trust her aunt not to open it if she gave it to any servant of rank. The note said, yes, on the terms discussed. H. Fairborn. She was married 11 days later, in the small chapel at Wycliffe, before a clergyman, her aunt, Mrs. Barton, the Duke's valet, and the Duke's own solicitor. There were no flowers, there was no music. There was a ring, which he placed upon her hand himself, his fingers cold and quite steady, and a signed contract, which was witnessed and countersigned, and a settlement which secured to her, in the event of his death or her wish to depart, a house in Yorkshire and 800 a year for life. Her aunt wept during the ceremony, but not from feeling. She wept because 7 years of a useful niece were walking out of her house on the arm of a duke, and she had not seen it coming, and she was too proud to admit that she had never really seen the niece at all. The carriage set out for Harrowmere Court in the early afternoon. Honora sat opposite her husband, and looked out at the running hedges and thought that she was, by the count of the calendar, a duchess, and that she did not feel like a duchess, and that this was probably normal, and that she had best say something before the silence between them grew a skin. "Your Grace." "Julian, I beg your pardon. My name is Julian. If you are going to be my wife, you may as well begin to use it. In private, at least, if the public use troubles you." "Julian, then." "Thank you. I would like, if I may, to know your daughter's name. You have not told me." It seemed the wrong question to ask before the settlement was signed. He was quiet a moment. "Her name is Cecily. She was named for her mother's mother. Her mother's name was Isabel. She died of a fever quite quickly. Cecily was 3. She spoke until the funeral. She has not spoken since." "Was she at the funeral?" "Yes." "That was unwise. I know it now. I did not know it then." Honora looked at her hands. "May I ask," she said, "did anyone say anything to her at the funeral, or in the days after, about her mother's illness, or about her?" He turned his head sharply and looked at her. "Why do you ask that?" "Because in my experience, Your Grace, Julian, children who go silent do so because someone has told them, in words or without, that their voice caused harm. I would like to know if such a thing was said to Cecily." He looked at her for a very long time. "My late wife's sister," he said at last, "was much in the house during Isabel's illness. Cecily was fond of singing. Her mother had taught her. She sang, in those last weeks, at her mother's bedside, because her mother had asked her to. I was told, afterwards, by a maid whom I have since dismissed, that my sister-in-law had said to Cecily in the corridor outside her mother's room, on the day before Isabel died, that her singing was tiring her mother and making her worse, and that she should stop, or her mother would die. And Isabel died the next day." "Yes." Honora closed her eyes. "And the child was 3. "Yes." "And she is believed for 4 years that she sang her mother to death." He did not answer. He looked out of the carriage window. His hand on his knee closed slowly into a fist. "I did not know," he said, very quietly, "until after the maid had gone. I did not know for 2 years. When I heard, I confronted my sister-in-law. She denied it. She has denied it since. She has told the court that I am a hysterical widower who has invented a cruelty against her in order to prevent her from taking my child into a proper household. That is the case, Miss Fairborn. Honora, that is the case against me. That is what you have married into." Honora opened her eyes. "Julian." "Yes." "I'm going to teach your daughter to sing again." He looked at her. He did not speak. He looked at her with such a naked, unguarded expression that she had to turn her own face to the window, because she could not bear to see it and be composed at the same time. He said after a while, in a voice she had not yet heard from him, "I believe you will." Harrowmere Court came into view at dusk. It was very large. It was very dark. It had, Honora saw at once, the look of a house that had not lit its full complement of candles in some years, as though the man who owned it were rationing the light against a grief he did not know how to end. The staff had assembled in the hall. Honora stepped down from the carriage on her husband's arm and walked the length of them, and Julian said to each of them, plainly, without apology, "This is my wife, Her Grace the Duchess of Harrowmere." And Honora saw the housekeeper's chin rise and the butler's eyes go politely opaque, and one of the younger maids stare openly at the size of her, and she saw also that Julian saw all of it, and that his hand under her elbow tightened by the smallest fraction and did not release. They came to the last of the line, a woman in dark gray, thin and upright, with a mouth like a paper cut. "Mrs. Fenwick," Julian said, "my daughter's governess. Mrs. Fenwick, my wife." Mrs. Fenwick did not curtsy. She inclined her head by perhaps an inch. "Your Grace." "Mrs. Fenwick, I understand my daughter is in the schoolroom." "She is at her books." "Then I will not disturb her tonight. I will meet her at breakfast." She was shown to her rooms. They were vast and cold. The bed had been made up with linens that smelled, faintly, of lavender, and more strongly, of a house closed too long. There was a portrait over the mantel of a fair woman, very young, holding an infant in a white gown, Isabel and Cecily. Honora stood before it for a long moment. Then she said aloud to the portrait, "I am not here to take your place. I am here to keep him warm and to teach her to sing again. If you can bear it, I will do my best." She slept badly. She rose early. She dressed in the gray she had worn to her wedding, because it was the best thing she owned, and she went down to breakfast. Cecily was already at the table. She was small for 7, fair-haired, like the portrait. Her eyes were very large and very still. She was pushing a piece of toast around her plate with the point of a knife, and she did not look up when Honora entered. Julian was standing at the sideboard. He turned. He said, "Cecily, this is Her Grace, my wife. She has come to live with us." Cecily did not look up. Honora crossed the room. She did not go to the child. She went to the chair opposite, which put her a good 6 feet from Cecily, and she sat down, and she said, "Good morning, Miss Cecily. My name is Honora. I have been told you do not care to speak, and I will not require it of you. I will speak enough for us both when I need to, and I will be quiet when you prefer it." Cecily's knife stopped moving on the plate. Honora reached for the teapot. "I saw a portrait of your mother in my rooms last night," she said, pouring. "She was very beautiful. I told her aloud that I would not take her place. I thought you should know that I said so." The knife stayed still. "I have 3 rules," Honora went on, adding milk. "I do not require you to speak. I do not require you to like me. I do not require you to call me anything at all. Those are my rules. Do you have any?" Cecily looked up. It was the first time she had looked at Honora directly. Her eyes were gray, not blue. Her mouth was slightly open. She looked at Honora for a full 5 seconds. Then she looked back down at her plate. But she picked up her toast and she ate it, which, Julian said quietly, from the sideboard, as though he did not trust his own voice, was more than she had done for breakfast in a fortnight. The first weeks at Harrowmere were the coldest weeks Honora had ever known, and the coldness was not chiefly of the weather. Mrs. Fenwick, the governess, opposed her at every turn. The butler, Mr. Vine, was punctilious and unwarm. The housekeeper, Mrs. Corrigan, had served the late Duchess and made no secret that a new Duchess was not, in her view, an improvement, but a substitution. The maids curtsied to Honora and whispered behind her when she had passed. Honora heard the whispers. She had ears trained by 7 years of being spoken about, in the hearing of the person one is speaking about. At least the linens will be well kept. At least the linens will be well kept. She heard that one twice in the first week, once from a footman in the pantry corridor, and once from Mrs. Fenwick herself at the schoolroom door addressed to a maid who was passing with a coal scuttle. She heard it, and she did not turn her head, and she did not stop walking, and she went to her rooms, and she stood in front of Isabel's portrait for a long moment, and she said quietly, "Well, that is what they think. Very well." Then she went to work. She did not scold the staff. She did not summon them. She began instead by opening every curtain in every room she entered. Mrs. Corrigan objected. The late Duchess had preferred the long gallery kept dim to protect the tapestries, and Honora said, mildly, that the tapestries were faded past the point of protection, and the child needed the light, and she opened the curtains, and she went on to the next room. She lit fires in rooms that had not seen a fire since Isabel's death. She had the drawing-room chimney swept, because it had been smoking for 2 winters, and no one had told the Duke because no one had wanted to bother him. She counted the linens herself, and found that 1/3 of them were unusable, and 1/3 of the rest wanted mending. And she sat down in the still room with the mending basket and began, and Mrs. Corrigan, watching from the doorway, closed her mouth on whatever she had come to say, and went quietly away. Julian noticed. He noticed the way a man notices weather changing in his own field. He came into a room, and the curtains were open, and the fire was lit, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, and then he went in. He came down to dinner one night, and there was a bowl of late roses on the table, cut from a bush behind the stables that had gone wild and forgotten, and he looked at them for a long moment, and then he looked at Honora and he said, "I did not know we still had roses." "You had them. They had gone unnoticed." His mouth moved. It was, again, adjacent to a smile that had not been permitted to arrive. He noticed her. He noticed the way she thanked the footman by name when he refilled her glass. He noticed the way she stopped in the corridor to write a picture that had gone crooked. He noticed the way she took the stairs slowly and did not apologize for taking them slowly. He noticed the way she sat with Cecily at the pianoforte in the evenings, not touching the keys, not requiring anything, only sitting on the bench beside her and turning the pages of the music while the child played. Cecily did not speak, but by the end of the second week, Cecily was walking into rooms where Honora was and sitting near her, and one evening in the library, Cecily brought Honora a book, a bound volume of hymns, and put it in her lap and stood beside her chair and waited. Honora opened the book. She looked at the first hymn. Her heart went very still. "Is this one your mother used to sing?" Cecily nodded. "Would you like me to read the words to you?" "Only read them." Cecily nodded. Honora read the words. She read them slowly, in her ordinary voice, and she did not sing them, and she did not hum. She read them the way one reads a letter aloud to a person who cannot see. When she came to the end, Cecily took the book back and closed it, and carried it away. That night, in the corridor outside her room, Honora met Julian. He had been waiting for her. He had a candle. His face in the candlelight looked older than his years, and also, oddly, younger, as though grief had worn one face down, and something else were beginning to show underneath. "She brought you the hymnal." "Yes." "She has not touched that book since Isabel died. Mrs. Fenwick tried to put it away last year, and Cecily bit her." "Good for Cecily." He laughed. It was not a large laugh. It was, in fact, more of a breath, but it was the first sound of that kind she had heard from him, and it changed the shape of his face for a moment, and she saw him, quite clearly, as he must have been before the grief, and it hurt her to see it, and she did not know why. "Honora." "Yes." "Thank you." "I have done nothing." "You have opened the curtains." "That is not doing anything." "It is more than has been done in this house in 4 years. Please accept the thanks. I am not accustomed to giving them, and I would rather not have to argue for them." She inclined her head. She said good night. She went into her rooms, and she closed the door, and she stood with her back against it, and she thought, dry as a bone in her own interior, that a woman who had been told for 29 years that she was dull as a ladle had no business feeling what she was beginning to feel about a duke, and she thought further that the safest thing she could do was to keep her feelings inside the ladle and not let them out. She was not, however, permitted to keep her feelings inside anything for long, because the sister-in-law arrived on the 3rd Tuesday. Her name was Lady Marchmont. She was Isabel's elder sister. She was thin and elegant and beautiful in the way that a very well-kept knife is beautiful. She arrived without warning, at 11 in the morning, in a carriage that had been driven hard, and she swept into the front hall as though she had never left it, and she said to Vine the butler, in a voice that carried, "Where is my niece?" Julian was in the estate office. He came out at once. He was pale. "Beatrice." "Julian, I have come to see Cecily. I have that right, I believe, under the arrangement made at Isabel's death." "You have the right to see her under supervision, not without notice." "I have given notice. My footman rode ahead. Did he not present my letter?" "He did not." "How very careless of him. Julian, do not stand in the hall like a footman yourself. Where is the child? And where," she added, her eyes shifting past him, Is this person I have been hearing about?" Honora came down the stairs. She came down slowly, because she took stairs slowly, and she did not hurry for anyone. She came into the hall in her second-best gray, and she stood beside her husband, and she said, "Lady Marchmont, I am Honora. I am the Duchess of Harrowmere. You are welcome under this roof for so long as you conduct yourself as a guest. If you cease to conduct yourself as a guest, you will leave at once. Will you come into the drawing-room? I have asked for tea." Lady Marchmont looked her up and down. She took her time about it. Her eyes went from Honora's face to her waist, to her hips, and back to her face, and she said, in a voice pitched for the servants to hear, "Good heavens, Julian! When they said you had married a poor relation in haste, I was prepared for a plain woman. I was not prepared for a large one. Well, at least the linens will be well kept. At least the linens will be well kept." Honora did not move. She did not blink. She said, in exactly the voice she had used to tell Mrs. Corrigan about the tapestries, "The linens are indeed well kept, Lady Marchmont. Come and see. You will find them in the drawing-room press, freshly aired. Will you take milk in your tea, or lemon?" Julian's hand at his side closed and unclosed. Lady Marchmont's smile did not reach her eyes. "Milk. And I will see Cecily now." "You will see Cecily after tea. She is at her lessons. I do not interrupt her lessons for anyone, including her father, including myself. You may wait 40 minutes. I would think a woman who has ridden hard would be glad of 40 minutes. There was a pause. Then Lady Marchmont laughed, brightly, showing her teeth. "My goodness, Julian. She sets terms. How diverting." "Yes," Julian said. His voice had gone flat. "She does. I recommend that you attend to them." Tea was a masterpiece of surface manners over deep water. Lady Marchmont said charming things. Honora poured. Julian sat and did not touch his cup. Honora kept the conversation moving as one keeps a boat off a rock, and she watched Lady Marchmont's eyes, and she saw what she needed to see, which was this. Lady Marchmont had not come to see Cecily. Lady Marchmont had come to see Honora, to measure her, to weigh her, to decide, before the court date, whether the new Duchess of Harrowmere was a woman she could destroy in a witness box. When Lady Marchmont had gone up to the schoolroom, under Mrs. Fenwick's escort, Honora went to the estate office and closed the door behind her, and said to her husband, "She will say in court that I am unfit, that I am too lowborn, too large, too plain, too much a servant, that your marrying me proves your judgment is impaired, that I cannot mother a child of Cecily's station." Julian said, "Yes, that is what she will say." "Then we will need proof of the contrary, and we will need to speak to the maid you dismissed." He looked up. "The maid who overheard?" "Yes, the one who told you about the singing." "Where is she now?" "I do not know. I dismissed her because Beatrice demanded it. It was a condition of Beatrice's continued cooperation in the estate. I was not thinking well, then. It was 2 years ago." "We will find her. What was her name?" "Anne Withers. She was a chambermaid. I gave her a reference. She may have gone to another house in the county." "Then we will find her by the end of the week. Julian." "Yes. You did not answer me last night in the corridor when I said thank you was owed for opening the curtains. You said something adjacent. Let me now say something adjacent in return. I did not marry you because I sang to a crying boy. I married you because you came to Wycliffe and stood at the window with your back to the room, and you were the first man in 7 years who did not look away from me when I entered. That is all. But that is enough. I would like you to know it. I do not intend to say it twice." He looked at her a long time. "Thank you," he said at last. "That is not adjacent. That is a great deal more." Anne Withers was found in 9 days. She was in service at a house 11 miles distant, a widow with 2 small children of her own to keep, and she had not spoken of what she had heard, because she had feared for her place. Honora went to see her herself, with Julian's solicitor, a careful older man named Mr. Halloway, who had loved the late Duchess like a daughter, and who had never, Honora perceived at once, forgiven Lady Marchmont for anything. Anne Withers told her story again. Mr. Halloway wrote it down. She signed it. She was moved that same afternoon, and with her employer's blessing, into a cottage on the Harrowmere estate at a wage she had not dared dream of, and her children were placed in the village school at the Duke's expense, and Honora sat with her over tea in the small parlor of the cottage and said, "You will not be asked to say a single word in court that is not true. You will not be asked to invent. You will only be asked to say what you heard. And when the case is over, whatever comes of it, this cottage is yours for your life. That is not a bribe. That is thanks. I would like the distinction to be clear." Anne Withers, who had heard, quite plainly, the words spoken to a 3-year-old child about a dying mother, wept a little into her tea and said, "Your Grace, I would say it in front of the king." The letter came the next day. It was from Lady Marchmont, addressed to Honora, and it had been carried by hand and left at the front door without waiting for a reply. Honora opened it in the estate office with Julian standing at her shoulder. It said, in beautifully written cursive, that Lady Marchmont had been informed by persons in the county that her Grace, the new Duchess of Harrowmere, had been raised for 7 years at Wycliffe Hall, not as a cousin of the Fairborns, but as an unpaid servant, and that her Grace's father had died in circumstances of considerable financial disgrace, involving certain sums borrowed from persons of rank, and that Lady Marchmont intended to place all of this before the court, along with certain observations concerning her Grace's person, and bearing which, while regrettable to enumerate, were regrettably germane to the fitness of her Grace to raise a girl of Cecily's expectations, and that Lady Marchmont wished, in the interests of family peace and of Cecily's welfare, to propose an alternative. If Honora would consent to the removal of Cecily to Lady Marchmont's household for a period of 5 years, all of these unpleasant matters need not come to court, and the marriage might continue unmolested, and everyone might be spared a great deal of embarrassment. Julian read it over her shoulder. She heard him breathe out very slowly. "She is offering you a bargain." "She is offering to leave me a duchess in exchange for the child." "Yes." "That is not a bargain. That is a test. She wishes to know whether I will trade Cecily for my own comfort." Honora set the letter down. "Julian, I would like to answer this letter myself. Will you permit it?" "You are my wife. You do not require my permission to answer a letter addressed to you." "I would like it anyway." "Then answer as you see fit. I trust your judgment more than my own on this, and that is not a courtesy. It is a fact." Honora sat down at the desk. She took a fresh sheet of paper. She wrote, "Lady Marchmont, I have received your letter of the 14th. My answer is no. I will see you in court. Honora, Duchess of Harrowmere." She sealed it. She sent it by return of the same footman. That evening at dinner, Cecily brought the hymnal down to the dining room and set it beside Honora's place, and Honora, without ceremony, opened it and read the words of a hymn aloud between the soup and the fish, and Julian sat across the table and watched his wife and his daughter, and did not eat much, and it did not seem to matter that he did not eat much, because something in the room had begun, very quietly, to warm. The court sat in London on a grey morning 3 weeks later. Honora had never been in London. She had never worn silk of the weight Julian had ordered for her. She had never been looked at by so many people at once as she was looked at when she stepped down from the carriage outside the court in Lincoln's Inn, and she had certainly never heard, so distinctly through the crowd, a voice pitched to reach her that said, "Good heavens! So that is the size of her, is it? Well, no wonder he needed the child to make it look like a marriage." She did not turn her head. Julian did. He stopped in the street. He turned. He looked into the crowd. He did not raise his voice. He said quite clearly, "The woman who spoke will identify herself, or she will not speak again in my hearing about my wife. I will wait." The silence that followed was the silence of 100 people deciding, one by one, that they had not spoken. Julian offered his arm. Honora took it. They walked into the court. Lady Marchmont's counsel spoke for an hour. He was skilled. He spoke of Julian's isolation, of the schoolroom's succession of governesses, of the child's silence, of the new duchess's low origins, of the haste of the marriage, of the impropriety of a household in which the mistress had, until 3 months prior, been engaged in domestic labor of the most menial character. He did not use the word large. He did not need to. He described Honora at length in ways that permitted the court to see her and to judge her, without his ever quite naming what he wished the court to judge. Then Mr. Halloway rose for the Duke. He called Anne Withers. Anne Withers, in a plain black gown, swore on the Bible and told the court, in a voice that trembled at first and then steadied, what she had heard Lady Marchmont say to a 3-year-old child in a corridor outside her mother's sick room on the day before her mother had died. The court went very still. Lady Marchmont's counsel objected. He objected at length. He was overruled. Anne Withers stepped down. Then Mr. Halloway said, "My lord, I call the Duchess of Harrowmere." There was a stir. It had not been expected that Honora would testify. Lady Marchmont's counsel half rose and sat again. Honora rose. She walked slowly to the box, because she walked slowly, and she was not going to apologize for it in this room of all rooms. She took the oath. Mr. Halloway asked her, quite simply, why she had married the Duke of Harrowmere. Honora looked at Julian. Julian was looking at her. His face was pale. His hands were folded on the rail before him. She looked past him for a moment, out into the gallery, and she saw Lady Marchmont, and she saw the assembled ladies of the county, and she saw the row of counsel in their wigs, and she saw the judge looking down at her over half-moon spectacles, and she thought, quite calmly, that she had been prepared for this moment for 29 years. She said, "My lord, I married the Duke of Harrowmere because he asked me to. He asked me to because he needed a wife by the end of the month and a mother for a child of 7 who had not spoken in 4 years. He came to me plainly, and he told me he did not need a lady of rank. He needed a woman who would sit in a corridor with a frightened child and sing to it. He had heard from his valet that I had once done such a thing for a footman's boy at Wycliffe Hall. He offered me a bargain. I accepted the bargain. I set my own terms. He met them. We were married 11 days later." She paused. "My lord, I have been asked by counsel this morning whether I am fit to raise the Duke of Harrowmere's daughter. I will answer that question with an account. 6 weeks ago I entered a house in which the curtains had not been opened in 4 years. I opened them. I entered a house in which the child at its center had not spoken in 4 years. She has begun, quietly, to bring me books. She has not yet spoken. She may not speak for another year. She may never speak in the way she once did. I do not require her to. I require her to know, and I have told her, and I will tell her every day of my life until she believes it, that she did not sing her mother to death. Her mother died of a fever. Her mother loved her singing. Her mother would have wanted her to sing again, and she will sing again in her own time, and no woman in this room or any other will tell her otherwise. My lord, I am aware that I am not the woman Lady Marchmont would have chosen for the Duke of Harrowmere. I am aware that I am not, by the standards of this court, the woman anyone would have chosen. I am, however, the woman he chose, and the woman his daughter has begun, quietly, to trust, and I do not intend to be moved from that position by any argument counsel can construct. That is my answer." She stepped down. The judge was silent for a long moment. He looked at her over his spectacles. He looked at Lady Marchmont. He looked at Julian. Then he said, "The court will adjourn until 2 o'clock." At 2 o'clock the judge returned. He ruled, in a voice that carried without effort, that the petition of Lady Marchmont was dismissed, that the custody of Cecily, only daughter of the late Duchess of Harrowmere, should remain entirely and without further challenge with her father, that Lady Marchmont's visits, if any, should henceforth be at the discretion of the Duke and Duchess of Harrowmere, and under such supervision as they should deem appropriate, and that the court took particular note of the testimony of the Duchess of Harrowmere, whom he described on the record as having given an account of unusual clarity and dignity. Lady Marchmont left the court without speaking to anyone. She went, Honora heard afterwards, to Bath, and thence, when the season closed, to a small house near the coast, which had been left her by her mother, and from which she wrote, twice a year, brief letters of formal inquiry after Cecily's health, which Honora answered with equal formality, and which Cecily never saw. The carriage home was quiet for the first hour. Julian sat opposite his wife. His hat was on the seat beside him. His hands were on his knees. He had not touched her since they had left the court, but his eyes had scarcely left her face. At length he said, "Honora." "Yes." "I would like to say something. I've been trying to arrange it in my head since 11 o'clock this morning. I'm not sure I've arranged it well. Please permit me to say it badly, if I must." "Say it however you can." He looked at his hands. 3 years ago I stood at a punch bowl at Wycliffe Hall, and I looked across a crowded room at a woman I had not been introduced to, and I said to my valet, because I was tired and because I had just refused a woman who had cornered me at the fireplace, I said, "Lovely face, dull as a ladle." I had not spoken to her. I had not heard her voice. I had not seen her hands. I had made a judgment that a woman of her person could not also be a woman of her mind, and I said it aloud, and I have thought about it every day since my valet repeated it to me, and I thought about it particularly this morning, when you stood in the box and spoke without a note in front of you, and reduced the case against me to nothing in the space of 4 minutes. Honora, I was a fool. I have been a fool about a great many things in my life, and about you first and worst of any of them. I did not marry you because I needed a mother for Cecily. That is what I told you. That is what I told myself. I married you because I had been thinking about you for 3 weeks, and I could not stop, and when I came to Wycliffe I knew, before you had spoken 10 words, that I had made a mistake 3 years ago that I would spend the rest of my life correcting if you would let me. I did not know how to say it then. I am not certain I am saying it well now. But you asked me, in the yellow parlor, why I had come. I told you I had come to apologize. I had come to marry you. I did not know it until I was in the room. He stopped. Honora sat very still. She said, "Julian?" "Yes." "Do not say it if it is only gratitude for the court. I will not have it if it is that." "It is not that." "Say it again." "It is not that. It has not been that. It was not that in the yellow parlor, and it is not that in this carriage. You are the woman I chose. I would like to be, if you will consent to it, the man you chose. Not because I sang to a child, because you did. And because you have opened the curtains in my house, and in me, and I did not know until you did it, that either of us had been dark." She looked at him. She said quite quietly, "You are a very slow man, Your Grace." "I know. I have been waiting for you to say that for 2 months." "I know. Come here." He came. He crossed the carriage. He sat beside her. He took her hand, her red-knuckled honest hand, and he lifted it to his mouth, and he kissed the back of it, plainly, without flourish, and he held it there for a long moment, and then he lowered it, and he said, into the space between them, "You are beautiful. I have thought so since the yellow parlor. I did not say it because I did not think I had earned the right. I am saying it now. You are beautiful, and you are the mind I ought to have known you were 3 years ago, and I would like, if I may, to say both things to you every day of my life, until I have made up the balance of what I owe. She laid her head against his shoulder. She said, "You will not make up the balance. I do not require you to. I require you to keep the curtains open, that is all. Then I will keep them open. Every day. Every day." The rain, which had followed them from London, thinned as they came into the county, and by the time the carriage turned in at the gates of Harrowmere, the sun had broken through, and Honora saw, through the carriage window, that someone had lit lamps in the great hall against their arrival, and that every window of the house was bright. 6 months later, the Obese